The wind howled across the Antarctic plateau with a fury that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. Inside the modified C-130 Hercules, senior researcher Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the frost-covered window, watching the white void below. She'd been with the Foundation for 12 years, but this was her first deployment to the bottom of the world. 5 minutes to drop zone, the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Weather's getting worse, Category 5 conditions. We won't be able to extract you until this blows over. Vasquez glanced at her team. 4 others, all bundled in Foundation-issue Arctic gear that made them look like orange marshmallows. Agent Marcus Chen, security detail, sat with his eyes closed, though she knew he wasn't sleeping. Dr. James Okoye, climatology specialist, was reviewing data on a ruggedized tablet. The 2 technicians, Sarah Park and David Reeves, were checking their equipment for the 3rd time. How long? Vasquez asked into her headset. Could be 3 days, could be a week. The storm system is massive. You've got supplies for 10 days, but I'd ration if I were you. She'd known the risks when she accepted the assignment. Outpost Polaris 7 had gone dark 14 days ago. No communications, no emergency beacon, nothing. The station housed a crew of 6, 4 researchers and 2 support staff, manning what the outside world believed was a seismology station. In reality, Polaris 7 was a listening post, monitoring for anomalous energy signatures across the southern hemisphere. The kind of work that required complete isolation and absolute secrecy. The Foundation had waited as long as protocol allowed. Now they needed to know what happened. The Hercules descended through screaming wind, and Vasquez felt her stomach lurch. Through the window she caught a glimpse of the station, a cluster of modular buildings half buried in snowdrifts, connected by enclosed corridors. No lights visible, no movement. The landing was rough, the plane's skids hitting hard-packed ice with a bone-jarring impact. Before the propellers stopped spinning, the rear cargo door was dropping open, and Arctic air rushed in like a physical blow. The temperature gauge on Vasquez's suit display showed negative 62 degrees Celsius. With wind chill, it felt closer to negative 90. "Move, move, move," Chen shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. They grabbed their gear and stumbled down the ramp into the screaming white. The Hercules was already lifting off before they reached the station's outer airlock, its engines fading into the howl of the blizzard. The airlock door was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. Vasquez cycled it manually, while the others huddled against the wind, and they pushed inside, sealing the outer door behind them. The inner door opened into the main corridor, and blessed relief from the wind washed over them. But the cold remained. "Jesus," Park muttered, her breath misting in front of her face. "Shouldn't it be warmer in here?" Vasquez checked her suit display. Negative 15 Celsius. The station should have been a comfortable 20 degrees above zero. She toggled her radio. "Reeves, can you get to the power systems? We need heat and lights." "On it." The technician moved down the corridor, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Emergency lighting should have activated the moment they entered, but the station was dark as a tomb and nearly as cold. They moved deeper into the facility, their flashlight beams revealing frost-covered walls and ice-rimed equipment. Their breath hung in the air like smoke. Vasquez felt the cold seeping through her Arctic gear, finding every gap and seam. This wasn't right. Even with the heating system offline, the station's insulation should have prevented this level of cold penetration. "Dr. Vasquez," Okoye's voice was tight. "You need to see this." She followed his light to the station's common area. The beam illuminated a figure sitting at one of the tables, and Vasquez's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, dressed in Foundation cold-weather casuals, holding a coffee mug halfway to his lips. His skin was pale gray, covered in a delicate layer of frost that sparkled in the flashlight beam. Ice crystals clung to his eyebrows and the stubble on his jaw. He sat perfectly still, frozen in the middle of a simple, everyday action. "Dr. Morrison," Vasquez whispered, recognizing him from the personnel files. The station's lead researcher. She moved closer, studying his face. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. The coffee in his mug was frozen solid, a tiny mountain of ice rising from the cup. "There's another one," Chen called from across the room. His light illuminated a woman standing near the kitchenette, hand reaching for the refrigerator door. also frozen, also perfectly preserved in mid-action. "What the hell happened here?" Park asked. Vasquez moved to Morrison and carefully touched his shoulder. The fabric of his shirt was rigid, frozen solid. She pulled out a medical scanner and ran it over his body. The device beeped, and she stared at the readout in disbelief. "He's alive. What?" Okoye moved closer. "That's impossible. Look at him." "I'm reading vital signs. Faint, incredibly slow but present. Heart rate approximately 1 beat per minute. Brain activity minimal but detectable. He's in some kind of extreme hibernation state." She moved to the woman and scanned her as well. Same results. "They're both alive. Frozen but alive." "How is that possible?" Chen asked. "Human cells rupture when frozen. The ice crystals—" "I know what should happen," Vasquez snapped. "But these readings don't lie. Somehow they're surviving in a state of suspended animation." A crash echoed from deeper in the station, and everyone froze. Chen immediately drew his sidearm, though Vasquez doubted bullets would be much use against whatever could do this to human beings. "Reeves," she called into her radio. "You okay?" Static answered her. "Reeves, respond." More static, then a burst of voice, distorted and broken. "Something wrong with the freezing. Can't. Reeves!" Chen was already moving, weapon raised, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Vasquez and the others followed, leaving the frozen figures behind. They found Reeves in the power systems room, standing motionless near the main generator. Like the others, he was frozen solid, his face locked in an expression of surprise. His hand was extended toward the control panel, fingers splayed. Frost covered everything. The walls, the equipment, even the air seemed to shimmer with ice crystals. "No, no, no." Park rushed forward, but Chen grabbed her arm. "Don't touch him. We don't know what caused this." Vasquez scanned Reeves, alive, impossibly, horribly alive, locked in his frozen body. She felt bile rise in her throat. This was beyond any anomaly she'd encountered. The clinical part of her mind was already formulating theories, some kind of cryogenic effect, a localized temperature manipulation, but the human part was screaming to run. "We need to find the others," Okoye said. "The rest of the original crew, and we need to understand what we're dealing with." They moved through the station methodically, documenting everything. They found the station's engineer in the communications room, frozen while reaching for the satellite phone. A cook in the kitchen, knife in hand, vegetables scattered across a cutting board coated in ice, each one alive according to the scanner, each one trapped in a moment of absolute zero. But they only found 5 bodies. The station crew had been 6. "Where's the 6th?" Chen asked, checking his weapon for the 4th time. Vasquez didn't blame him. The pistol was probably useless, but it was something to hold on to. "And where's the heat going?" Okoye added. He'd been taking readings throughout the station. "The temperature is continuing to drop. We're at -18 now. The station's insulation should prevent this, even with the heating offline. Something is actively pulling heat from the environment." Vasquez thought about that. An entity that drained thermal energy. That would explain the frozen crew, the temperature drop, the frost on every surface. But what kind of anomaly could do that? And where was it now? As if in answer, the temperature dropped another 3 degrees in the space of a minute. Park gasped, hugging herself. "It's getting colder." "We need to get out," Chen said. "Call for emergency extraction." "In this storm?" Vasquez shook her head. "We'd freeze to death before any aircraft could reach us. We're stuck here until the weather clears. Then we need heat, fire, chemical warmers, something. If the temperature keeps dropping at this rate, our Arctic gear won't protect us." They retreated to the common area, the largest open space in the station. Chen and Park gathered everything flammable they could find, while Okoye set up portable heaters powered by battery packs. It wasn't much, but it created a small bubble of warmth in the frozen darkness. Vasquez stood near Dr. Morrison, studying his frozen form. In the light of their small fire, she could see his face more clearly. And then she noticed something that made her blood run colder than the air around her. His eyes had moved. When they'd first found him, he'd been staring at nothing, eyes focused on the middle distance. Now those eyes were tracking her, following her movement. She stepped to the left. The eyes followed, stepped right. They followed again. "Oh God," she whispered. "He's conscious. He's aware." The others gathered around, shining their lights on Morrison's face. The frozen man's eyes moved, tracking each light source, each person. Behind those ice-rimed lids, there was intelligence, awareness, terror. "He can see us," Park said, her voice cracking. "He's been like this for 2 weeks, frozen, unable to move or speak or scream, but conscious the entire time." Vasquez felt sick. She'd encountered horrors during her time with the Foundation, reality-bending anomalies, predatory entities, things that violated the laws of physics and sanity. But this was different. This was a torture beyond comprehension. To be locked in your own body, frozen solid, aware of everything, but unable to do anything, for 2 weeks. She moved to each of the other frozen crew members, checking their eyes. All of them showed the same signs of awareness. All of them were watching, trapped in their crystalline prisons. "We need to help them," Park said. "There has to be a way to thaw them safely." "Any attempt to rapidly warm them could cause cellular damage," Okoye warned. "The ice crystals in their tissues." "I know the risks," Park snapped, "but we can't just leave them like this." "We might not have a choice," Chen said quietly. He was looking at the temperature gauge. -25 and dropping. "Whatever's causing this is getting stronger or closer." Vasquez made a decision. "We search the rest of the station, find the 6th crew member, find any records or logs that might explain what happened, and we figure out what this thing is and how to stop it." They split into 2 teams. Chen and Okoye would search the research wing, while Vasquez and Park checked the living quarters. The station felt even colder now, and their breath came in great plumes of vapor that froze and fell like snow. The living quarters were a series of small, cramped rooms connected by narrow corridors. Vasquez pushed open the first door and found a bedroom, perfectly preserved but empty. The second door revealed the same. The third, "Here," Park called from further down the corridor. "Dr. Vasquez, I found something." The room was different from the others. Frost covered every surface in thick layers, icicles hanging from the ceiling like teeth. And in the center of the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was a woman. Unlike the others, she wasn't frozen in the middle of an action. She sat deliberately, hands resting on her knees, eyes closed. The frost around her was thickest, forming strange patterns on the walls, fractals and spirals that hurt to look at. Vasquez checked the personnel files on her tablet. Dr. Sarah Chen, physicist, specialist in thermodynamics and energy systems. She scanned the woman, alive like the others, but the readings were different. The temperature around her body was lower, -40 degrees, even in this already frozen room. And there was something else, an energy signature the scanner couldn't quite classify. "What's she doing?" Park asked. "I don't know, but I think..." Vasquez moved closer, studying the patterns on the walls. They weren't random, they were equations, mathematical formulas written in frost. She was working on something, some kind of experiment or calculation. "Involving what?" "Zero-point energy, maybe. Look at this." Vasquez pointed to a sequence of symbols. "This is Carnot's theorem, and this is the 3rd law of thermodynamics." She was studying absolute zero. "You think she caused this?" "I think she found something, or something found her." A sound echoed through the station. Not a crash this time, but something worse. A long, slow creaking, like ice expanding. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees in seconds. Vasquez's radio crackled. "Dr. Vasquez, we've found something in the research wing. You need to see this now." They ran through the corridors, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly. Chen and Okoye were in the main research lab, standing before a massive whiteboard covered in equations and diagrams. But it wasn't the board that held their attention. It was what hung in the air in front of it. At first, Vasquez thought it was just a trick of the light, a distortion caused by the extreme cold. But as she moved closer, she realized she was seeing something that shouldn't exist, a void in space, a region where light and heat simply ceased to be. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a basketball, and it floated 3 feet above the floor. The air around it shimmered with ice crystals, and the temperature near it was the coldest reading Vasquez had ever seen, -73 degrees Celsius. "What is it?" Park whispered. "A heat sink," Okoye said, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and fascination. "A perfect heat sink. It's absorbing all thermal energy in its vicinity, not reflecting it, not conducting it away, absorbing it, making it cease to exist." Vasquez studied the equations on the whiteboard. They told a story, one that filled her with dread. Dr. Sarah Chen had been researching theoretical physics, specifically the nature of absolute zero. Not just achieving it, but what might exist at that temperature, or below it. "There's no such thing as below absolute zero," Park said, reading over her shoulder. "That's impossible. Absolute zero is the point at which all atomic motion ceases. You can't go lower. Unless," Vasquez said slowly, "you're not dealing with normal matter. Look at this notation." She was theorizing about negative temperature states, matter that exists in a quantum configuration where the laws of thermodynamics run backward. "That's not possible," Okoye said. "We're looking at it." Vasquez gestured to the void. Somehow, Chen's research opened a door. She created a region of space that exists at negative absolute temperature. A cold so intense it doesn't just freeze things, it drains the very concept of heat from existence. "And it's growing," Chen added grimly. He pointed to marks on the floor, measurements taken over time. "According to these notes, when it first appeared 13 days ago, it was the size of a marble. Now look at it." The thing was expanding, slowly but inexorably. And as it grew, it pulled more heat from the environment, creating a feedback loop. The colder it got, the more it grew. The more it grew, the colder it got. "The crew," Park said, "when they got too close, it flash froze them, pulled all the heat from their bodies in an instant." "But why are they still alive?" Chen asked. Vasquez thought about that. "Because it's not death. Death requires biological processes to stop. But this thing puts them in a state where biological processes become meaningless. Time itself slows down at extreme cold. At the quantum level, they're barely experiencing time at all. From their perspective, only seconds have passed." "So they're trapped," Okoye said, "conscious but frozen, experiencing every moment in slow motion. Until we can reverse the process, if we can reverse it." Vasquez studied the void, her mind racing. "We need to contain this thing, stop it from growing. But how do you contain something that drains all heat? Any material we use would just freeze and shatter." "We can't," Park said. "Look at the projection." She pointed to a graph on the whiteboard. "If it continues growing at this rate, it will consume the entire station in 18 hours. And it won't stop there. The cold will spread, creating a zone of absolute zero that will expand across the continent." "An ice age," Okoye whispered. "A real one, not climate change or orbital variation, a spreading zone where heat ceases to exist." "Then we destroy it," Chen said, raising his weapon. "You can't shoot cold," Vasquez snapped. "And any explosive we use would just feed it energy to absorb. We need to think." She turned back to the whiteboard, studying Chen's equations. The woman had been brilliant, working on the cutting edge of physics. But she'd made a mistake, opened something she couldn't close. There had to be a way to reverse it, to seal the breach between normal space and this negative temperature void. And then she saw it. A single equation, circled multiple times in red marker. An error in the calculations, a sign convention reversed. Chen had realized her mistake, but too late. "The void isn't expanding because it's feeding on heat," Vasquez said slowly. "It's expanding because the breach is unstable." Chen opened a doorway to a region of space-time where temperature runs negative, and now normal space is trying to equilibrate. The only way to stop it is to close the breach. "How?" Okoye asked. "By giving it what it wants, more heat than it can possibly absorb. Overload it, force the breach to collapse." "We don't have that kind of energy," Park said. "Not here. The generators are offline, and even if we got them running, it wouldn't be enough." Vasquez thought about the station's power systems, the fuel reserves, the equipment. Park was right. They didn't have the energy needed. "Not unless the reactor," she said. "What reactor?" Chen asked. "The thermoelectric generator, RTG. Every Foundation listening post in Antarctica has one, for backup power. It's essentially a small nuclear battery using the decay heat from plutonium-238. She turned to Reeves's frozen form, visible through the doorway. He was heading for the power room when it got him. Maybe he had the same idea. "An RTG puts out maybe a kilowatt of heat," Okoye said. "That void is absorbing megawatts. Not if we crack it open, release all the thermal energy at once. It would be like dropping a bomb made of heat into that thing's mouth." "That's insane," Park said. "The radiation will be the least of our problems if we don't stop this thing." Vasquez was already moving, heading for the power room. The others followed, because what choice did they have? The RTG was housed in a heavily shielded container in the station's mechanical space. Vasquez had Chen help her drag it back to the research lab, their muscles straining against the weight even in the freezing cold. They positioned it as close to the void as they dared, and Vasquez began working on the containment seals. "Once I open this, the radiation will be intense," she said. "And I don't know what will happen when that much thermal energy hits the void. It could collapse, it could explode, it could get worse." "So we're gambling," Chen said. "We're out of time." The temperature in the station was now negative 35 degrees. Even their Arctic gear was struggling. Soon they'd start experiencing the same fate as the crew. Vasquez unsealed the RTG's outer containment and exposed the plutonium core. Heat radiated from it, a blessed warmth in the frozen hell of the station. She rigged a simple mechanism using a pry bar and a length of cable, something she could trigger from a distance. "Everyone back," she ordered. "Into the corridor, behind as many walls as possible." They retreated, leaving the RTG in front of the void. Vasquez paid out the cable until they were 2 rooms away, then looked at the others. Their faces were pale, frost forming on their eyebrows and lips. They were running out of time. "Here goes everything," she muttered, and pulled the cable. The pry bar levered the RTG's inner containment open, exposing the plutonium core directly to the void. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the heat began to flow, a torrent of thermal radiation pouring into the cold sink. The temperature in the station spiked, ice sublimating from the walls in great clouds of vapor. The void flickered, distorting, and a sound filled the air, a high-pitched whine that climbed beyond the range of hearing. "It's working," Park shouted over the noise. "The breach is destabilizing." But so was everything else. The walls groaned, metal contracting and expanding simultaneously. The floor cracked, ice heaving upward, and through it all, the void pulsed, growing brighter or darker, it was hard to tell, reality itself seeming to tear around it. "It's going to collapse," Okoye yelled. "The whole station." "Run!" Vasquez grabbed Park and pulled her toward the exit. Chen and Okoye were already moving, sprinting through corridors that were both freezing and burning, ice and steam mixing in impossible combinations. They hit the airlock as the world behind them came apart. The void collapsed inward, taking the RTG, the research lab, and half the station with it. But instead of an explosion, there was an implosion. A rush of air and heat and screaming cold that tore through the facility like a living thing. And then silence. Vasquez found herself on her back in the snow outside the station, her ears ringing. The blizzard had lessened to a mere gale, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. She sat up, checking herself for injuries. Miraculously, she seemed intact. The others were scattered around her, also moving, groaning but alive. She stood on shaky legs and looked back at the station. Half of it was simply gone, collapsed into a crater of twisted metal and shattered ice. But the other half, the half with the frozen crew, was intact. And even from here, she could see the frost on the walls beginning to melt. They found the crew members an hour later, after the temperature in the intact sections had risen above freezing. One by one, the frozen figures began to thaw. It was Morrison who moved first, the coffee mug slipping from his fingers to shatter on the floor. He collapsed, and Vasquez caught him, feeling his muscles spasm as blood flow returned. "It's okay," she told him. "You're safe. It's over." His eyes focused on her, and she saw in them the memory of 2 weeks frozen, 2 weeks of absolute awareness and absolute stillness. He tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. Over the next several hours, all 6 crew members revived, all except Dr. Sarah Chen, whose frozen form had been in the section of the station that collapsed. They searched the rubble, but found nothing. Perhaps she'd been vaporized in the void's collapse. Perhaps she'd been pulled through into that impossible space of negative temperature. They would never know. The Foundation sent a new recovery team once the weather cleared. They evacuated everyone, sealed the station, and classified the entire incident at the highest level. In the official reports, Outpost Polaris 7 had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure during a blizzard. The truth was buried under layers of secrecy and misdirection. But Vasquez remembered. She remembered the cold, the frozen eyes watching her, the void that drank heat like a black hole drinks light. And she remembered Dr. Chen's equations on that whiteboard, the brilliant mind that had reached too far and touched something that should never have been touched. 3 months later, sitting in her office at Site 19, Vasquez received a classified report. Seismic monitoring stations across Antarctica had detected an anomaly, a region where temperature readings were inexplicably low. Not by much, just a few degrees. But the cold spot was growing. Somewhere in the ice, something was waking up, or something had never truly gone to sleep. Vasquez filed the report and tried not to think about it. But late at night, when her office grew cold despite the heating, she would remember those frozen eyes watching her in the darkness, and she would wonder if heat, that most fundamental form of energy, was something the universe could truly afford to lose. The file on her desk was labeled SCP-8002. Inside was everything they knew about the deep freeze incident. Everything they'd learned about negative temperature states and the void that drank warmth from the world. It wasn't much, but it was enough to know that they'd been lucky. Lucky to survive. Lucky to contain it, even partially. But luck ran out eventually. And in the frozen darkness at the bottom of the world, something cold and patient and utterly alien was waiting. Waiting for another door to open. Waiting for another chance to spread its impossible chill across the warm, living world. Vasquez shivered and turned up the heat in her office. But no matter how high she set the thermostat, she couldn't quite shake the cold that had settled into her bones. The cold that whispered that some doors once opened could never truly be closed. And in the deepest ice, in the places where heat went to die, something watched and waited, and slowly, inexorably, grew.